I have a lot to share tonight. It's supposed to be 45 minutes. I'll try my best to keep it in that time frame. But every time I look at this presentation and I try to subtract or add, it just doesn't make sense. So I think for our work, you kind of have to understand the full context of the studio, a bit of background on myself and my partner, Meg, and wife, Meg, who, as I was talking about earlier, has probably just as much impact in the work of the studio than I have, but I just get thrown to the front lines and have to talk about it. She gets to be behind the scenes and really run the show. So anyway, I'm just gonna dive in. Title of the talk, it's called Time is Form, Form is Time. There's a lot of converging topics that I'll discuss about animation and movement and music and some undertones of like Eastern philosophical thinking, and all this kind of comes together and why we do the things we do at the studio. I'm going to promote myself because I'm American. Instagram. I should delete that fourth one because that one's on hold. If you want to see dog pics, and I'm into wine anyway. So that's a clip from the Wayne Shorter quartet. That's Wayne Shorter on saxophone, Danilo Perez on piano, John Patitucci on bass, and Brian Blade on drums. Showing that for a very specific reason. And if you paid attention to the clip and you watched the musicians play, you could tell that they were so engrossed in the moment in performance that they had forgotten what's happening around them. They're making crazy faces, just fully immersed in that. And this idea of performance or improvisation is something that's really central to, I think for myself as a designer or an artist or musician, that's really central of like what's happening now. Like I'm just kind of making this shit up right now and I'm talking to you to a degree. I know what I'm going to say, but I don't really know. But it's sort of that performance and that time and being in the moment. So the thought of what is this? If we're designers, we learn typography, we learn, how to design posters, we learn to animate, but I think there's a bigger story on what informs my decision when I do something now. My life experience, how I was raised, the theories and the people that have influenced me, the research and practice that I've done to that point are going to lead me to what I do now. And then we can take a step back and look at that. But I think it's important that those things are separated, the before and after, but engrossing yourself in the moment and just doing stuff without worrying about the results, without worrying about the criticism or comparing it or worrying about reflecting on that. It's just purely being in the point of creation, just like the musicians I just shared. I'm going to talk a lot about the input. I didn't kind of clarify that. So the input is that stuff that happened leading up to now, and then the output is obviously the results of that. So I'm just going to get in here. So a little bit behind the studio. This is Computer Boy, also known as Daniel Wenzel. Marge, my wife and business partner, she's the best. DigiD, also Deanna Sprazza, and then myself. This is the top of the Guida Midi in Chamonix. This is for a studio trip just last year. And then Layla has been holding down the fort for the last 11 years in studio. We are split between two very extreme landscapes. Chamonix, obviously the natural version of Manhattan. I think taller. So Meg and I are based full-time in Chamonix, and then Deanna lives and works in Staten Island, and Daniel, while we couldn't convince him to move to Barcelona, wanted to be in Brooklyn, so we got him a visa to live in Brooklyn. Don't know why I wanted to be there. It's so expensive. We said, don't do it. But anyway, he knows that he wants to move to Barcelona now. So anyway, get into it. So roots, you need to know a little bit about me. I know because I'm American and we're storytellers, you know all about my life. But I'm a pianist first and a musician first before I really got into the craft of design. And this would be playing a recital like 8. And then over time, I get cool when I'm in my teens, snowboarding, skateboarding. I'm introduced to the visual language of, people like, Neville Brody or, these guys, messing up typography. You see like David Carson, you see this stuff. I was like, this is pretty rad and really interesting material along the sides of me being interested in these sports. And then as time grew on, I was kind of fascinated by, as studying and being involved in music and piano, I heard this record by Herbie Hancock. I was 16 years old. I can remember the room I was in when I heard this. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to learn jazz. And I was like, Mom and Dad, here's a guy I want to take lessons from in Kansas City. Please, this is what I want to do. Rest of my life, I wanted to do that. And on top of it, I'm looking at this record. I mean, this is insane, like from a visual perspective. The illustration, the typography, also sort of gravitated at the same time. And from the music of Herbie, introduced me to Wayne Shorter, and then got to understand both Herbie and Wayne Shorter's history through more spiritual understanding in their study, and I think Nichiren Buddhism and a lot of Eastern philosophies that have really integrated into why I think they produce the creativity that they do. And that fascinated me a lot. So I kind of see him as an individual, like kind of a unofficial guru in a way of, what he's been able to do with his life and career. So simultaneously, you meet these people through, music, but then you're obviously inundated with just incredible design history. It's funny if you compare, this is Blue Note record covers with the ECM record covers. It's like they're having more fun here, I think, but also really interesting in like an uptight European way. I'm just gonna throw that out there. This is, and this is just me proving that I can play. And then some original music and stuff that I do. So this is my therapy when I'm not on the computer. Enough of that. Let's get into some design. All right, so I'm going to discuss the idea of identity. What does that mean? And what I was talking about earlier about improvisation, all these things in our life that bring us to the point of doing something or performing, made me think about what's identity from a design perspective. So I think about, maybe evolution in a way. I think about a zebra. It looks very specific. It's a very unusual creature that's from this very specific part of Africa. That's because it evolved to be that way because of nature, all the different surroundings around that form this interesting thing. And it's not just the visual, it's the way it moves, the way it breathes, all these other kind of conditions that are connected to it makes it what it is. And so that kind of made us think about this further, the idea of movement being an identifying character in work or in anything. And that's true. We all have our own certain gait when we walk. And actually, one of my best friends from New York, he was like, I always know it's you from a mile away because you look like a shit-eating grin on your face when I walk. So I kind of like walk like this, my shoulders back. So only do that because I broke my back and I have weird posture. But he was like, just my walk. He's like, that's Mitch's walk. So you can remove my body and flesh, but see that movement and then know that was me. And I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting. So what defines that? What are the kind of parameters or rules that create these kind of systems from an aspect of motion? So it really starts with physics, gravity, electromagnetism, all these things, these are things that we fundamentally understand through movement. Just, we know how a bouncy ball bounces. We know how something rolls. We know how a car stops. These are just natural things in nature that we understand. So if we start to think about this and emulate this within a design context, interesting results start to come out. So in all this stuff is really, calculated in trigonometry and physics. And then we can take that and apply that to typographic experiments. So this is, these are, I think, maybe almost 8 years old now. But looking at this now, it was literally like, what if you apply gravity to this? Or what if you apply this idea that, like, you remember you drop marbles in a bowl, this thing on the left? So replace the marbles with text, really simple. So this really became kind of a point of experimentation in the studio when we were doing this, is like, what if we just put typography in place of the form of what was there? And that basically set us off on just this crazy journey and just seeing how far we can push this. And as I continue to talk about this, you'll see how music and rhythm will come into that. So biomechanical systems, so we're all limited by the structure of our bones. There is a system within us because there's limits. And that's interesting looking at this piece by Edward Muybridge. This is the first sort of filmed loop thing. And loops are very interesting, especially if you think about coding and creative coding. Like the idea of a loop really is the entryway into something that's systematic or coded within animation. So this is cool. So we know this is a horse, we know this is a jockey, the way it moves, but at any different still, you have a different dynamic capturing of that moment that gives it a different unique feel, but it's still the same system that provides that. Just through, I don't know, there's like 16 or 20 images, but so we could do a whole series of posters just based on this idea by capturing this moment in time. And again, you know, all these things, you know, you can develop into code, you have the trigonometry there, so it really sets you up to develop systems from a, you know, tech side standpoint too. But I think, you know, looking at this material from a graphic design perspective, you see the system, you see the rhythm, you see the patterns. This stuff becomes really fascinating to think about in the application of an animation piece or a design piece. So looking at how caterpillars sort of move their legs, and then what happens if you just throw text and replace that. And I think the one thing that we realized here is that the sampling of stuff in nature and influenced by that gives it a gesture that makes it feel more real or more believable than something that's sort of generic or straight line or robotic, for example. If I didn't have this expression or this kind of quality of movement, then it wouldn't have that emotive feel to it. And you could deliberately do that in a way to cause a relationship with your emotions of the work as well. It gets more interesting, obviously, bringing in rhythm and choreography to this. I'm going to talk a little bit about some music theory. For those of you who don't know, this is probably pretty straightforward, but I find this really interesting to discuss because you'll start to understand the relationship the body has to movement, to sound, and to form. So if you listen to Jefferson Airplane here, if people know where to clap, you clap on the 1 and 3. So 1, 3, 1, 3. It's like we're going to battle, you know. But if we listen to Drake, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 2. So why I'm doing that is just by emphasizing the 2 and 4 versus the 1 and 3, the body feels that differently. I'm just playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to war. 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to have some beers. So that's interesting and fascinating to me because, you know, you see that there's a body relationship to this. And then, you know, we can get more abstract with this. You know, if anybody knows how to waltz, there's this kind of this. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, and then we can get into Radiohead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Pink Floyd, of course. Pulling out some British stuff here. What's fascinating, I mean, this song's in 7/4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it gets more interesting when we can augment this grid. So this is really just a grid in graphic design, essentially, but for music. Now in New Orleans, we did this thing, and I didn't tell you this, I was trained in music and design in New Orleans. I lived there for 6 years, so New Orleans is pretty close to home. But there's something in New Orleans interesting. It's not a quite straight, it's not quite swing. Swing is one, like ba-doop, 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 or bup, bup, bup. There's something in between that makes you kind of wobble, you know? This is like 4 beers in, but still tight. And this is like such a sound that comes from that culture, but it's just the augmentation of where the rhythm is being hitting. It changes how I feel. And then for those of you that are Dilla fans, it's offsetting and playing with things later or earlier off the beat, but still landing on it. So like, you know, being just a little off gives this kind of like funky wobble. And I find this really fascinating because it really is just understanding the subdivision of time of where we can emphasize and play with stuff has an impact on how the body reacts to it. And that is like a universal truth in music. So like you heard the march versus the Drake track. We felt differently. Everybody felt differently. And it's just that simple little thing within music that does that. For example, you know, you think about techno, I don't know how much ecstasy this guy had in the 90s, but also this relationship to music and music styles and how the dance and performance comes out of that. So this is New Orleans second line beat. That's that New Orleans sound. You have this kind of improvised rhythmic dance, but you see the connection of movement into that rhythmic structure. And the ultimate example is the Jabberwockies, of course. Whoops, let's go back. So basically all they are doing are making and breaking the grid in music, so to speak. They're dancing, they're hitting points, but then they're breaking the time, but they're landing on it. And it's creating this really expressive art form within choreography. And for me, there's really interesting parallels in how we can look at animation and design and how that impacts the process. So the idea of capturing time, this other thing happens. When someone is back in that improvisational performance mode, so focused, so in the moment, then beauty is natural no matter what, if it's in movement or in static. There's always capturing that time, and that focus there always sort of lends itself to some beautiful moment. Just like the Edward Muybridge piece, when you could capture the horse. There's something elegant, interesting in that capturing of time, some tension that's there that wouldn't be able to be built or designed through a set of, you know, Swiss grid rules, or by example. So, you know, looking at a lot of artists and other designers through the past, kind of seeing this kind of play and of how motion can be captured or created, or languages can be created out of it. There's, you know, notation for dancing is really fascinating, I think, for from a design perspective. I think this is Rudolf von Laban created a whole system for choreography in ballet. But you see this like a typographer. This is like typography dream here, but like through the body. And I just find this fascinating that we can create kind of systems and structures with the limitations of the body and how it moves rhythmically. And even in like kind of a naive, fun way, like this piece by Giacomo Balla. And I think there's something here that the tension in this kind of work that can't be done by manual means, like crafted. It has to be captured. And that unresolved, I find really interesting. I think as something to play with within graphic design, for example. So, like we said, all we do is replace it with text. So there's a b-boy dancer just through a very technical process figured out how to put typography within the head and hands. But then this just becomes the formula. You start to think about everything rhythmically as if I'm writing a piece of music or developing a beat. You know, and these are just examples of just promoting different events in the past. But if you start to look at this work from a perspective of like a beat maker, but just applying typography instead of beats, it's very clear that we're playing with the subdivision of time and looping and creating things and adding things to that. And there's an underlying rhythmic quality to it. So now you know the whole secret. That's it. But something fascinating came out of that, you know, this working back out of this movement. You know, now I can never create a poster as a static piece anymore. I have to look at it as a system that can generate something. So whether it's a loop, whether it's a generative system, whether it's something that's, you know, creative coded, this is impossible to do from manual means, but it is possible to do from capturing something through motion. So you get exactly what I was showing you within some of those other pieces of artwork. And then this basically set up the entire system of how we look at work. You know, when we approach sketches, we start here and then we find application for it, and then we end in the static pieces. The print pieces end up being the last thing that we do once we figured out the system that we can generate something from, everything just naturally falls in place. And what's fascinating about that is that the motion's consistent, the interaction's consistent, and then also the stills are consistent. When you work from static into motion, you lose consistencies because you have to develop transition moments, fades, croppings, all these things get in the way of the work itself. So when you come from this, it's a pretty direct translation of the work through all the different mediums. Luckily, this discovery happened when social media is popping off, so that was very helpful for the studio. Thinking about the medium of the work, and our work specifically, I think is quite ephemeral. It's all basically animation, very digital work, and I think this movie really kind of put us where we are today. Like, this is exactly where our work lives. So, we're in VR, AR, thinking about how the technical advancements in communication is going to evolve design like it has throughout history with printing and all this stuff. But I think, thinking about these things, but looking at them from a graphic design lens is really important for us to prototype and consider. So on top of all that kind of rhythmic theory, typographic stuff, it's all right, what can we do? Can my face be a format for typography? Can we think about 360 cameras in a phone? Can a dumpster be somewhere we put text? Now I think these are bold pieces now. This is like real now. So it's like anticipation for what may be a format where design's going to live. So that, you kind of have to prototype and think about how this could be possible, using a lot of the technical advances that come out. And that's the thing, is like Adobe doesn't allow us to do this. We have to like hack and find ways to develop things like this. And they're not set up for graphic designers. So it's really just this R&D and experimental thing that we have to go through to play with stuff like that. Layla's face is also typography, it's fun. And also it's fun. So yeah, she's probably, too bad she doesn't know. She's like, why did you do that to me? So that leads me to another thing. I think once we unlocked a lot of how animation became sort of a tool to develop stuff, what's the next step? So thinking about the evolution of music and instrumentation is interesting. Let's see the audio. So the organ, the keys are pretty much the same as the piano. The harpsichord evolved. The sound. So harpsichords are interesting because it's a plucking the string, so the volume's the same. So someone along the way got tired of that and was like, we should be expressive. We should be able to play soft and loud with more kind of emotive quality. And then eventually Herbie Hancock came along with all the synthesizers and was able to do whatever we wanted. And it keeps going. We eventually lose the keys. We have people like Jay Dilla with hardware instruments making great music without classical instrumentation. And now we're all within a complete, on my computer, I can make something crazy without actually having any technical ability to play keys, which to me as a pianist is kind of a hard thing to grapple with. But I've, listening to music of people that don't play piano and just do stuff, it has equal impact emotively to me than people that have the technique. So I've kind of gotten over that, trained pianist elitism. But anyway, the point is that, while we're trapped by the Adobe, the Cinema 4D, why can't we just start to develop our own tools for the work? So I'm just going to quickly show some examples of things that we've done where it's not really creating a piece of design, it's creating a tool that then the client gets to basically use within the parameters of things that we built into it. So this was a piece we did for Space 10, which was the research lab of IKEA, which actually recently closed. Basically was a tool where they can create stuff for social media, marketing, and things like that. So the design team could get in there and animate, export stuff at different sizes, stills, GIFs, posters, all kinds of different stuff, and even type in text, track it out. So basically, it was a mini design tool, but really the consistency was baked in, black and white, Helvetica now. That's the one thing that was constant that couldn't change. So rather than looking at the output, the finished piece, it was more looking at this intermediary thing that would replace sort of brand guidelines or something like that as a tool that's developed for something specifically. Some more things. So, it's funny, these things are look super cool, but you actually get bored and don't want to play with them very long. So you just pick the preset. You're like, oh, that's cool. So what you realize is the clients have an urge for efficiency more so than being creative. It's maybe the first week they have fun with the sliders, but then they get used to it and they're like, I'm just going to pick one of the presets, change the text, put the new image in, and render. And that really, I think, has a big impact on how we approach a lot of the projects that we do. And here's some outputs. Like, this is crazy. That's rendered out of that system. This could be done in Cinema 4D or After Effects, but it would crash your computer. And then within like 10 seconds, I have the render out of that system. So certainly within the studio, there's a lot of proficiency within technology and coding, JavaScript, but also within Cinema 4D and After Effects to prototype these things. You know, we have to sketch these things first before we build that tool. Yeah, a lot of fun stuff there. And so more recently, this is a project for kind of like a tech lab. You know, we have a lot of these tech labs in the US. I'm not sure what they do exactly, but they have money and they look cool. So similar idea. It was really just playing with this idea of SMXL with this kind of exponential growth based on the name, and created a typographic tool that can do all kinds of stuff. You can, you know, video yourself, you can put GIFs in there, and then you can generate all kinds of different stuff from that. So you can see what using technology is this kind of like the super advanced version of what I was talking about with the MyBridge piece. You know, it's really taking that idea of a visual system with rules, but really trying to see how far that stretches, you know? And I think that's, you can find that pretty fascinating and fun. And it's fun because you're like, how far can we push this? Like the rollover even has the same effect. Even like this, you know, it becomes more of the behavior and how that affects the work than the actual elements themselves. Like how these ideas of movement and behavior become really important into that. All right, so take a break from some techie rhythmic stuff. I'm gonna slow things down. Parallel, for those who don't know, Meg and I are also the directors and partners of Monkeytype, a type foundry. This project started in 2016 as a joke with a designer named Philip Hubert from New York. He's like, let's start a type foundry. We call it Monkeytype. And I was like, great idea. In Skype, there's these monkey emojis that were funny, and this is when we used Skype, and that was it. And then by pure chance, like, I don't know if this is like a stroke of luck, M, N, K, Y are the only capital letters with vertical and horizontal strokes. So it became a really good name for type design by accident. Just going to point that out. So here's some examples of some typefaces that we've been producing over the last 8 years. And I think this project really, I think, got perfected when I took the residency at ACAL. I was teaching there in 2018. But what I basically did is like creep around the type design department for 6 months and just bothered everybody with my stuff. So like you have Francois Rappo, you have all of the best Swiss designers in and out. Hey, will you check out my shit during lunch? You know, and they're like, Mitch, aren't you here to teach? I was like, no, I'm here to learn from you guys. So this is just a lot of typefaces. I think right now there's 8 that are commercially available, and probably by the end of 13 or 14 typefaces. This one, you know, it's funny. I was setting type in like pub names before I got here, and I was like, this looks good for like a British hotel. So yeah, and actually we're getting some serifs out there as well. That was a big goal for this year. Some like a Dido kind of new take on that. So I'll zip through this. Fonts, you know, we are at the Society of Typographic Designers. And then on top of it, what's fun is that we can take all that other stuff that we do at DIA and then apply it to the promotion material of the typefaces themselves. So it's just a self-feeding beast of things that goes on. And what's fun about this is that there's no rules. I don't have a client worried about the refraction of the 3D. We just can make stuff, post it, and if it sucks, it sucks. If it's cool, it's cool. It doesn't really matter. So just here's a little bit of that stuff. And it becomes kind of like a good way to explore and also use efficiently to see how the typefaces are behaving in these contexts. So yeah, let's see. All right, and because I'm American, just take a picture of that. So we like to promote. All right, so you've got the input. You see this crazy mixture of all this stuff, music, dance, type design, body stuff, zebras, and then dropping a lot of British music on this presentation tonight. Kamal Williams for you.
This is with my homies. It's me and my homies. It's me and my homies. It's me and my homies. And everybody smoking. We're right up to the ceiling. What's everybody feeling? Crashed out on the sofas. Let me show you what my homies. My homies. My homies. Now listen. My homies. My homies. Just me and my homies, me and my homies, me and my homies, and everybody smoking, up to the ceiling, what's everybody feeling, crashed out on the sofas, let me show you what my homies, my homies, now listen, my homies, my homies.
All right, so a lot of words in there. It was funny. I posted that in some reel last week, and like one of the clients was like, "There's a lot of words in the reel," and that was like it. That's all they said. And I was like, "It's because I like type, man. That's like it's what we do." Anyway, I'm gonna talk about two projects really quick. I think your one. This is my favorite project that we've ever done. It's weird and really bizarre and cool, and it's one of those opportunities where, it's client lets you kind of do what you want to do. It was the visual identity for the Biennale Internationale de Design Graphique Chaumont, français, 2002, whatever. Anyway, so viral. This is the interesting thing about our studio. I think conceptually, I think it's really important to find things that are direct, clear, and shit simple. And so, okay, viral images, and viral expansion. So let's just play with those two things and see what happens. And then what's viral typography? Let's kind of do the highbrow version of that and throw like Weingart in there. It's kind of like meme, but rad meme. And that became kind of the fixture of exploration. So this is us just doing layouts. This interesting here. So this is us working in static, but not thinking as a static poster per se. It's sort of looking at typography and the tension between that, and it's just exploring and playing with that, potentially a poster. But what's nice about this one is that we ended up here. Okay, that was so this is that's the one, that's the direction we're going in. This kind of not quite right size, uppercase, lowercase, but I guess it feels viral. So this becomes sort of the basis of the system that we're going to approach typographically through motion. But systematically, this is how we're going to approach the hierarchy of the text. And then simultaneously, once that's sort of figured out, we're going to start looking at the art direction and the images. So what you're seeing is like, let's make a literal virus out of viral images on the typography. Again, conceptually pretty straightforward, but I think it allows this kind of really artistic expression of the idea becomes interesting. So just really seeing what we can do technically here. So eventually we got here, we were able to license some images, which is super fun. And then we Easter egged pictures of ourselves in there. You can see me, you know, that dance people did like 2 years ago? It's me doing it up there, holding my dog. And then we developed a system of integrating that images within the typography itself using that system that I was showing you earlier with how the text was laid out. So this is interesting. This is actually all done in After Effects, but hacked like a generative tool. So that's when people ask like, okay, what script or what tools you're using, it's like anything at your disposal. But sometimes it's easier just to hack existing stuff just to make things happen because I don't need to hand this off to a client. We can just do it internally. And then here's the animated logo. You can see Yoda pop out every once in a while. You can kind of read viral. And that really becomes the basis of the visual identity. Yeah, that's the avatar. It's funny. But what's cool about this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You have these moments that you can capture that I could never design by hand that are just so wrong, but you can tell that there's something systematically there that holds it together. And then on top of it, we develop within the system this kaleidoscopic thing to do something more abstract. And then we just basically have endless variations of this that you can produce. And so this became the promotional materials, the different posters. Everything's different. Every poster is different. And then from the animation to the still, I can just hold this, and then technically, let's see if I can pause it. Anyway, you get the idea. If I pause this any moment, I essentially can just like render out a static image and send it to print. And so you have this like super rich system doing pretty radical stuff. But from a production standpoint, once that was figured out, it was just like boom, boom, boom. Here's a social piece. Here's a poster. And it was fun to kind of like, we just kind of selected 6 pauses and we're like, that's a good poster. Let's just send it to print. That makes people really nervous. You know, like designers like, wait, you just picked that and sent it to print. You didn't like noodle it. And like, nah, it was just like, that's the one. And that's like, it was liberating. I think when the first time that happened was like years ago on an 8-track project, I was like, wait, that's all I have to do, you know? But that's wrong because there was a lot that went into that before I got to the point. But then it kind of like blew my mind as a trained designer where I was always lining shit up on grids that I didn't have to do that anymore. I could just like hit pause and send it to print. But the tricky thing here is that we had an editorial piece. We had to emulate this, which unfortunately isn't so simple. So we were integrating a lot of the same behaviors of the typography within the text itself. So you have this tension, you have the cap. It's really interesting. If you run through the book on the side, each caption on the left-hand side runs in a different way. So you see the animation within the actual skimming of the page numbers and the credits. So that was pretty fascinating. I have to credit Jillian Cashin was the editorial designer. She's amazing, amazing Swiss designer based in Zurich. She's a good friend of ours. She actually worked in our studio in New York separately from like a Swiss grant or something like that. And then we're like, I know who's doing the book for the Showmont thing, Jillian, and she crushed it. And it was kind of an interesting thing because one thing teaching in Switzerland and being in Switzerland, the Swiss aren't like collaborative per se. I don't know. I don't want to be politically correct. So there was like giving feedback on there was kind of tricky because it was like a first. You know, she had to deal with like an American client, I guess. It's like, yeah, just make it more radical. Get it off the grid, break the grid. And she, you know, and then eventually we got to a place that was just really blew my mind. I think that's my favorite part of the actual project, just to see the actual book, because I've never designed a book. I've never made a book. I'm too scared of them. I can't even like do business cards. They like scare me because I'm going to misspell something. So this is one of the rare projects where you see a lot of actual, you know, hard printed material that comes out of the studio, which just makes me so nervous. Because I like to be, oh, there's something wrong with the video. Here's a new video. You can just update the old one. So yeah, here's the cover. Here's some interior spreads. Let's pop through that. All right. So that's viral. This one, I'm tired of talking about, but it's important that I talk about. We were having a discussion earlier with Astrid, and I think that branding awards shouldn't happen until 5 years after the existence of the brand. So therefore, you cannot give the award show the work until it's lived in time for more than a period of time. 2018, this was released. To this day, this project hasn't changed. Now, some social materials have evolved, but if you go to the website as is now, it's based on the work that came out then. And I think that's an important thing to bring up as designers, finding ways to make it easy for the production of that work. No matter how creative or how cool it is, it needs to be produced in an efficient way. Otherwise, it will fall apart. And what's important about this project, I think, comes down to really I have this American sales pitch. This is how you do it. You make a video that gets people really fucking excited. So this is the strategy of the whole project right here. This is it. Icon being New York. It's so simple. I think it's funny because like people get so excited about that, you know. You have this all hands meeting with a tech company, and you're just like, here's the video, and then you put on this spiel, and everyone's like, yeah, that's it. And I'm like, it's just Squarespace. That's it. It's such a simple thing. But you know, you have some flavor, and then people get excited about it, and it works. If you can make a reel before the presentation, you have an 80% chance of improvement on the potential project getting approved. Guarantee it. So just keep in mind. So Squarespace, the idea was to really embody this thing about design in New York specifically, but you know, mid-century, kind of what I would say very well-funded mid-century design in New York, which is Squarespace in a way, and then typographically really speak that same New York language. It was the antithesis of the tech branding of San Francisco. You know, everything's happy and fun, and it was like, let's just be cool. Which is funny because, you know, this was the dress code for the design team at Squarespace. So that was already kind of baked in. Black and white, helmet laying, you know, you had the look and feel. Everybody kind of acted like this. Even the architecture of the office was already there. I was like, this is so obvious. Why doesn't the typography say the same thing that everybody is already doing? Which is, you know, kind of nice. Like they've already kind of figured out unknowingly how they want to be perceived and behave and from a brand perspective. So that just needed to be translated that within a graphic design perspective. So most importantly was, I think, for us to develop a custom typeface that spoke what Squarespace was through those references. What's New York tech? What's New York fashion? What's New York typography? It's kind of like this hodgepodge of accidents meets Helvetica, but then you do some subtle things to make it a bit more, you know, fashion forward. So Francois Rappo from Optimo was responsible for this, and I really had to wear my American sales hat on getting this approved because this was the first draft, and I was like, oh, this is too good, too fast. So how do you tell a client something that's in the meeting that's already like, I'm like, this is good to go. So I'll tell a little story. What we did, I printed out like 100 specimens, just all kinds of shit, just so people could like look at stuff and draw on things. And it got so overwhelming for them. They're like, I think this is the right way to go. Yeah. Basically, the point was to make them feel that they weren't experts in type design. You hired the 65-year-old man that lives in the Swiss Alps. That all he does is draw fonts. He lives by himself in like a modernist cube house from the 1930s in vineyards. This is true fact. This is Francois. This is his life. So it's like, just let him do his shit, and it's going to be fine. So these were some, I mean, this is also insane for me to look at the variations between the options. I'm like, I can't even see the difference, you know, like the untrained eye, you're like, oh, okay, the cue's a little different there, a little cut here. So this is, you know, what we were dealing with, but exciting for me because I knew we were onto something really strong, but it was like, oh shit, how do we get this through the finish line? So we got it through the finish line through some push and pull. So then, you know, thinking about the typesetting, you know, if you look at the New York subway system, type letting, you know, justified left, just kind of repeating that same vernacular that you would see already that's visible within the system itself. So part one figured out. So once the typeface is figured out in a branding job for me, 90% of the work's finished. I think for me specifically, people argue with that, but I think if used correctly and the typeface is used correctly and chosen correctly, that has the most presence on the brand communications, down to like the invoices, down to everything. So let's see how we can play with this in the Squarespace thing. These are some early sketches, not super exciting, but like, whoop, remember that Squarespace idea? Like, let's go back to a system and see what we can do with that. And then we just started to explore and play. And then we realized that if we put anything in an isometric camera and slanted it, that it worked, similar to a lot of these systems I was showing before. So then it was just like endless. We're like, oh shit, we can just do anything with this as long as we play with this Squarespace thing. And we were just doing stuff. It was funny when we shared this with David Lee, and this is also a luxury because David Lee is very kind of progressive creative thinker. He's the chief creative officer there. And he was like, I don't know what this is, but it's cool. So let's just keep going. And I was like, great. I said, we can figure out the practical matters of this, but as long as you're down with like conceptually and visually we're going with, then we can figure it out. And very lucky to have a client that gave us that opportunity to do that. And also, this is another luxurious position that this project was only done with there was Ness Higson, David Lee, and Anthony Castellana, who's the CEO. There was 3 people at Squarespace, executive team, and then us. So myself and the DIA team, 4 on our side. 7 people involved in this project for 8 months before it got shared to the larger company itself. Let's just say the design team wasn't super stoked that they weren't involved in this, but however, that would have created more committee and all kinds of stuff that would probably have degraded the work as we got it through the finish line. So I don't think this will ever happen in my career, that there will be this tight-knit kind of covert branding job at such a huge corporate level. But really, I think I still to this day get excited about it because it was kind of like a once in a career opportunity. So more, still static. And then eventually we get practical. We create behaviors that can be, defined as, either transitions or, framing devices, all kinds of different stuff. And then we finalize the typeface itself. Big thing here was figuring out how things were going to render in UI specifically. And that was super important within the project and the type design project. And then this is the launch video for the brand. So there's some other Squarespacey things. Just push through this. All kinds of stuff. I mean, we did these generative posters when we launched the brand in there. I mean, this is a lobby, which is crazy. It's like some high-end hotel. Really kind of wild stuff. But that, to me, which I think there was a moment, I'll show you. Yeah, this actually, I think, to me, was some of the most interesting part of figuring out how typography worked within the actual UI in the system. And this comes down, this is a really important thing, I think, to think about. The selection and the creation of that typeface has to be at a certain level to behave in certain contexts. So in my opinion, there's not, like, every font can't work in these contexts. I've seen it happen where you have a branding job, you see the typeface, and then you go to the product and you're like, why isn't it working in the product? Because it just doesn't render well. So there's a production, there's a quality and a level of type design that has to be achieved to work in tech products. And I think that's something that a lot of designers may forget about. It isn't about just picking the cool typeface or at the time. It really has to be crafted and mastered and produced at a level for it to be executed. And luckily with Optimo, Alphabet Type did the mastering, and then Francois's drawing skills, it worked out quite well. But on top of it, then we built a suite of creative tools for the design team to use to generate a lot of the work itself on top of that. And then the kicker was, this is probably the most radical type you'll see in the New York Stock Exchange. That was kind of crazy. So when they went public, they were like, let's do this, you know, let's like up the ante. I'm like, all right. So we had like a 200-foot screen in Times Square to just like shatter type on, and that was kind of a rewarding bonus on the project that I probably will never do that again in my career. I don't think I'll ever have this media to use again in another project. Who knows? But yeah. All right. So closing things out a little bit. So kinetic identity, that's kind of this all-encompassing idea of using movement. So concept that relate to the passage of time, visual systems created or amplified by the means of animation behaviors or computation. So kind of sums up the process in the projects. This is, to me, an antiquated way of looking at things. I just think we need to come at creative problems from a 360 holistic view. You know, maybe it's ink splattered on the floor, maybe it's 3D, maybe it's animation, maybe it's just type design. It's really opening up the possibilities of how the process can begin creatively. I've taught briefly-ish. Seems like I've taught a lot more than that. Mostly in Switzerland and a bit in The Hague. And I want to share a few things from this because I thought it was important, because a lot of the discoveries that we made in the studio wanted to bring that within the academic environment to see if pedagogy could be developed from that. And as you've seen throughout this connection between movement, form, and sound, this kind of trifecta of things, you know, how they can speak to each other. Like sound can create movement, sound can create form. They're all interconnected. And that really served the basis of my workshops and curriculum within my classes. So let's see if you can hear this.
Sounds like, and movement would be like.
So imagine like in a class in Zurich, like making students do this, like it's a little uptight in there, but it's fun because what happens is like, I have like an undertone of something I'm trying to push. It's not just the creativity, but there is like just the mental health benefits, like the self-confidence, the things that you can break through by behaving like this that makes you feel better when you're doing stuff. It's like, you know, when you're singing happy birthday, for example, you don't want to be like, happy birthday. If there's a guy that's screaming and you're like, man, I'm really annoyed, but it's kind of rad that you're going full blast. So like, I'm trying to get everybody to just go 100% and really just commit fully to the performance and do stuff. And that's, you know, and that's really rewarding, I think, within the academic environment and working with students. And these are some of the examples of different workshops and stuff that are all really based on some of the same idea. This is input output. You know, we had, you know, how can you develop a system that just generates the final product? The final product couldn't be crafted. It had to be through means of some sort of system. This is probably, to me, my favorite of all. This took that trifecta, that, you know, combining movement, sound, and form, and we had groups of students had to develop a language that then they could create a performance from that. So here, the idea is to create things through emotion, you know, with anger, happiness, whatever. You know, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Or what, if I make the sound, do you know what I mean? So the language was developed by each group independently, and then they gave a performance at the end of the workshop. That was very, I think, radical or experimental. So here's just a little brief little clips. So this is all improvised too. They just know the emotion that they're working with, and they're working together to perform the composition essentially. All right. So some got pretty arty there for you, but I think that was one of the most rewarding things that I've ever seen. Like these things were just created by these groups completely. There was like no rules except for just defining a language that you could perform something with. And the idea there is to really understand the relationship of movement, body, sound, form coming together, and then creating a system that can actually communicate as well. So there really is an idea of, system making or generative design thinking within that as well. But that was more free, it wasn't typographic. So to sum things up, this idea of the beginner's mind, or just kind of being this always curious and, pushing yourself to what's next. And that's why I kind of go back to Wayne Shorter. I think he won the Grammy of the best jazz album of the year in his early 80s. His whole life is kind of pushing to, what's next, what's more interesting, in this idea of being in this learning seat the whole time. And this is my piano teacher when I was 18. It's not a mistake if you play with conviction. It's really interesting thing to think about when you're giving a client presentation. If you walk in with confidence and just yeah, this is what we're doing, they're not going to refute you if you have that confidence, especially within the performance or what you're doing. I think, and within jazz or within music, this is especially true. It's just what you do with the mistake and how you translate that it may actually be something more interesting. Resistance is what an airplane needs to take off. For me, I've always kind of felt like I don't know my place or what we're doing. We're always kind of fighting things on the outside. I think I didn't fit very well in Switzerland. I always felt this kind of resistance, even within the work, some of the ideas that we were doing. There was always this resistance, but I think that's really important because that gave me more energy to kind of prove things wrong or push things forward. And I think there's no better way of saying that. And I think getting into this improvisational mindset and performance, this all vanishes when you commit fully. When you sing happy birthday to you to your fullest, you're not worried about people thinking you're an idiot. You're not comparing how good you are to the person next to you, and et cetera. I think that commitment to the performance, that improvisation and just going for it, is really just a healthy way to approach creativity. And to conclude the talk, I'm going to let John Baptiste and Wayne Shorter talk about a little.
What are you trying to relate to them, that feeling? What's your intent?
Well, actually, the intent now is to throw away and kind of put away everything that was learned, the studied stuff. Again, I always refer, because Miles is the only one who would talk like this. He'd say, Wayne, he said, hey, Wayne, do you ever feel like you want to play? He said, you want to play like you don't know how to play? And then he said, do you feel like you'd like to play music that doesn't sound like music? That doesn't sound, I know it's familiar. And I have a tape of Charlie Parker giving a lesson, and the student says, Mr. Parker, I have to learn all these scales, memorize all these scales? And Bird said, yes, and after you finish learning them, forget them.
Right. Play as if you don't know all of that stuff, or you're not playing a scale, but you're playing straight from the heart.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you very much. I only went slightly over. I somehow managed to get that in 52 minutes. So a lot. I think there's 270 slides. But I guess there's question time or.
Yeah, no, we have 20 minutes more or less of Q&A. That was so mind-blowing. I mean, we could tell from the silence in the room that you really had the attention of absolutely.
I just thought my jokes weren't hitting. I was like, why are you guys so quiet?
So yeah, 10 minutes of Q&A. Thank you, Mitch.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you. Got one.
First of all, thank you so much for a brilliant lecture. The question is, for example, I see you work, and I can definitely recognize who did that, which studio. So sometimes studios have their own style. Sometimes you're surprised when you see the new identity or emotion, whatever. And what do you think? What is the best for business, or maybe for you as a creator, to have a recognizable style, or to vary your language so much it can be like
it's a great question, because there's not a wrong answer. I have a strong opinion on this. What's great for business is to reduce your style to something that's interchangeable with any studio logo. To me, that it bothers me that I can see great work, but then I can just mix portfolios up and not know where it came from. I think there's also a degree where you're an artist and you're doing something very specific, and you're hired as an art director, and that's obviously super important as well. So it's a different path. If you want a huge company with a bunch of employees, forget that you have like a taste or style that you're trying to commit to. Now, in our case, it's kind of in between, because we deal with big corporate clients, but there's a methodology of the work that makes it probably pretty consistent. There's an interest in typography that we're really curious about. There's an interest in movement. There's an interest. These things have drawn the clients to us. But if you look at the execution of Viral versus the Flowdesk project we just did, they're radically different, but there's definitely a thumbprint on the work. And that, to me, if from a business perspective, I want to see that thumbprint. My favorite studios, my favorite designers, there's a thumbprint in there that they're able to put their little touch on everything, even though the sector is completely different. I'm like, oh, I know that's Astrid's work. Immediately I can tell. Even if they're completely radically different projects, that to me is a top for me. So also may not be the best business move, whatever, but I really have huge respect for studios that maintain some core belief system and process that the work comes out of it that really speaks to that work. So, and I'm just saying that because that's what we do, so of course I'm going to say that. Anybody else?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a really amazing talk.
Thank you.
I was really curious around, so much of your work is so experimental, and you mentioned around hacking into tools, and Squarespace was that example when you talked about having to make it achievable for clients. And is that something you often have to do, is just creating generators and specific tools to then be able to almost package and do like that handover?
Absolutely.
For like the assets.
Funny, we had like brief conversations leading into this, and these are the same topics that we're hitting on. Number one biggest complaint: don't send me PDF brand guidelines ever. Throw them out. They should not exist in 2024 at all, unless you're doing a restaurant or something. So, templates that are easy to use, static, motion, all need to consider as much of the possible endpoint of the work as possible. That guarantees that the work is going to stay consistent. On top of that, you have the motion problem and you have the interactive problem. Definitely takes a level of skill to do certain things, but so our handoff for our projects looks like an index of access to, and either it's a generative tool like this SMXL or the Space 10 thing, or it's an After Effects project that has been coded in. So you just input text, upload image, hit render. You don't need to be, you can open up After Effects for the first time, read some of the, what's funny is that I actually give tutorials and put them in these things. You hear my voice. Open this here, check this out. I'm not kidding. Like I'm the voice of the tutorial guy in our thing. And it's amazing because then you see that when I was talking about this earlier, is that on the client side, you design teams, we have an assumption that, there's also the practicality of the day. They need to get something done in 1 hour. You don't have time to decipher brand guidelines and figure out all this stuff. They just need to get some shit done and go to lunch. So this makes people's lives so much easier. And I think a lot of the thing is, I worked in production, commercial production at the beginning of my career. I was an animator at the end of projects, and it's awful. Someone changes one thing, you got to start over, you got to redo the edit. It's so painful. And so I have deep empathy for the people that are at the end of the line of the production. So if you make that easier there, screw the executive creative directors. They're not down in the weeds. Not screw them, but they're nice. But they forget that someone actually has to render and produce. So if you see the lens through the whole pipeline, you have to set them up with toolkits that make it really simple and straightforward. So Squarespace, all that crazy stuff, there's an input, input image, input text, and there's all this crazy stuff happens in the middle that you don't have to worry about. And then there's a render comp. You just hit render. Then you have 9x16, 6x9, 1x1. And then the tools are awesome because then you can customize the actual, export ratios and stuff. So knowing where the project's going to live at the end has a huge impact on how we deliver it. I would say it's more of a guide. It's a tool kit with not brand guidelines. It's literally a keynote of renders of examples with an index of where to find the shit that you're looking for, so then you can make it. And that's it. That's what all of our deliveries look like. Sorry, I'm very passionate about that one. Anybody else? There's one in the back.
Hi, Mitch. Great to see so much wave in your presentation. I think I said a couple of times about the Squarespace project. I'll never get another gig I never get. Is that because the world has changed, or is it because you've changed, or is it because big tech has changed?
Well, all of the above. I think there was just a lot of factors there. We were in a prime of the studio of R&D where we didn't know what we were doing on that project. Essentially, we were taking our R&D in theory and putting it into practice at such a large scale that it was a bit scary and really exciting. So now, we've done equally projects for even bigger clients, but that satisfaction of the unknown is not there anymore. So Flowdesk, we just did a custom typeface with Rapo. We had a system with Motion, but it's automated now because it's in our vocabulary. So I think for me, there's what's the unknown beyond that? Who's the next client of that scale that's going to take the risk of something that I don't know yet that's going to allow us to explore together to get there? And I can't even see a brand that I would even want to do that for, I think, which is even weird to say. So I think I've changed. Obviously, I think the timing of that was perfect. Also, the group of people were perfect on that. It's the only tech company where I never had to deal with a huge committee of marketing people. There was no marketing people on that. That's insane. Nothing against marketing people here. They ruin graphic design. They like to make bold, exciting. Why make exciting bold? You can just read the language. It's the same. So yeah, I don't know. I think all of the above. And I don't know if I'm getting older-ish. So having a studio of 4 people work on projects of that scale is a lot of energy. It goes on for, that was 13 or 14 months. We can't really do much other projects during that time. You have to dedicate everything and all your power to that. And I don't know, it has to be the right magical mix of a client and people that we like for that to happen again, I think. Yeah. I knew you were going to ask something. It's like you have the journalist in the back with the tough question. Anybody else?
You mentioned there 4 people. Have you ever had a desire to grow bigger, and what opportunities or what other reasons not to grow bigger? And I guess a 2-part question: where do you see yourself in the future?
Smaller. No, we were bigger. We had a 4,000 square foot office in Tribeca between 2010 and 2013. So just think about that from a business perspective. Overhead. So then you have to take on shitty projects to keep the machine going. And we almost went under. Like we were this close to like going out of business, I think. And then we were like, we have to get out of here. Like this is gonna ruin the company, ruin the creativity. It was low. Meg, my guiding force, got us out of there. I don't have the foresight. I'm like, she just puts me in front of a problem and I mow it down. But she sees the foresight and she was like, we got to get out of here and change things. So we moved into a tiny office in Dumbo, slimmed the team down. It was just 3 of us at that point. And then Daniel just joined us right after that. And then it was Deanna, Daniel, the 4 of us. And then as soon as we cut the overhead, we cut it in like 80%. All of a sudden we had time to explore. We didn't have to worry about paying rent, doing things. So that period of time from leaving that office to Squarespace was literally like a year and a half. We went from like going almost closing to off the charts. And the only reason why we're able to do that is that we had the luxury of not having to worry about the overhead expenses. And here's the thing, like I talked about me being in commercial production and being an animator and all these projects. Like our studio works like a motion graphics company. So we don't work like I'm not going to use Pentagram as an example. We don't work like a classic branding firm at all. It's like, here's a problem, just start making some stuff, go as fast as you can, see everything you can do, and go. There's no meetings at all. The only time, it's like the day before the presentation, everything's out. And then we just like, okay, I usually don't know what's good or bad because I've seen it. And Meg's like, that stuff's pretty interesting. Let's just go for that. And it's easy to mock stuff up and make it look good. But like, at least you've known that you put all of the iterations out and then you kind of like intuitively like, oh, that's interesting. Let's throw that in the presentation. Oh, that's interesting. Throw a presentation. There's no like creative director like, nah, we need to go back and work on that further. There's none of that. It's literally, that's how we operate. So it's surprising if you look at that reel, that's done essentially by the 4 of us. But the secret is finding the right people to collaborate with at the right time. So Francois Rappa doing the typefaces. Zach Lieberman helped us out on some creative coding stuff. There's a lot of collaborators that come in that do assist. So we do have like a 2nd tier freelance kind of always, if we call them, they're like down. Doesn't happen often, like some animators and stuff, but the team never grows beyond like 5 or 6. And I think that, like I'm in the trenches, Meg's in the trenches, everybody's working together. The ability to get so much done as a small team is pretty easy to do if you're efficient and thoughtful in the process. So, but it's up to you. We were talking about that earlier with Svayat's question about like scale. But for me, honestly, I just moved to the French Alps and I'm like going more into a hermit thing. So, yeah.
You mentioned that your agency nearly went under. Do you have any other like fails that you want to talk about, or you could bring up along your journey?
Oh, I can't talk about one of them because it'll actually get me in trouble if I talk about it. But we've been blacklisted by one of the biggest tech companies on earth. That was a fail. Don't be careful with social media. Yeah, and NDAs and things. Don't break them. Yeah, I made that mistake. Yeah, that I can't talk about that, but that was the worst. That was literally the worst. I can tell you off the record, off video, that it was still haunts me to this day. I think the other thing, and talking about like the overhead and you're growing and trying to figure out business. No one teaches you business in design school. That one thing that I see happen all the time is like creative ideas that are expensive. Avoid them. Don't get a like crazy 3D idea that's going to have a big live action shoot with motion capture. You don't need it. Try to find something that you can just use typography and elegant. It's more affordable at the end of the day, and it's better for business to approach things from a typographic perspective. If you want to drill me on that later, I can explain why. Yeah, I'll tell you after the biggest fail of my career.
So actually, I was thinking that you've got so much existing language and typefaces and music, and bringing that together with the form, you've got an interplay relationship. There's lots of things already established there, so you've kind of got a head start on the process somewhere.
it was lucky. It was how do I mix music and design? I studied jazz performance at Loyola University, dropped out, actually kind of got kicked out because I was only cherry picking the classes I wanted. And the dean was like, it's going to take you 8 years to graduate the music program. And I was like, all right, I think he caught on to my scheme. But I was studying graphic design in parallel, and it's always been this fusion, so it's natural that we went to motion graphics as the first gate, editing and stuff, playing. So yeah, I think that's always been central to the work of marrying the two together somehow, which I think I illustrated in the presentation. Anything else?
Yeah, thanks for showing us your process. It's so interesting to see the experimentation and all the different ways you go about this, the early part of the project. But obviously there's a point where you must lock everything down and put all these restraints on. So it's not so fun to talk about restraints and just to talk about experimentation. But just wondered, how far along do you start locking things down? Is this going to be black and white, orthographic camera at this point?
I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about the process is understanding, and goes back to some of the academic stuff that I was doing, is like tapping into your heart and your intuition more than what you think might be good or bad or what they expect. And as soon as that guides you to the spaces, so if we have a week to do creative exploration, all three of us are just jamming, just making stuff, just crazy stuff. And eventually we use Keynote because you can't play live videos all at one time. It's really hard. There's no really tool for that. You can GIF it and put it in Google Slides, which is really annoying. But you just throw it all out there and then review it. And basically, for me, one of the things, if it makes me laugh, it's like on. Like Computer Boy will make some shit. I'm like, whoa. And I start giggling. And I'm like, that is so off the wall and crazy. I was like, that's going in. So that happens. So we have this kind of reflection over the work that's very guided by an intuitive thing. Because also we don't have time to overthink it. This is like the day before the presentation. We establish a few routes, 3 or 4 within there, and maybe like a gradient of stuff. And depending on the client, sometimes we just share the process openly. If it's a creative team, we don't need to mock stuff up on billboards or do any of that stuff. It's just like, here's a bunch of interesting stuff we can have a conversation about. But at that point, depending on the client, if it's not a creative client, you do have to mock stuff up in the respective place it's going to live. But I think, it's easy. I think it's easy to make stuff look pretty. It's hard to get those interesting things. So, it's making sure that you have enough time to find that giggly moment that you're excited about stuff, and then you just clean stuff up and put it in context. You're always going to have to lay stuff out, put it on a grid, some practical information, but at least you feel satisfied that the creative idea or the concept is rich enough that it can be built upon beyond that. So, but honestly, it's like literally 48 hours before presentation is when that happens. It's like, go, 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 go. Oh shit, we need a mock-up presentation. And it's been even hours before, right up until the call is boom, okay, on the Zoom, here we are. And Meg's like, what's taking so long? I was like, my keynote's freezing right now. I can't do it anymore. As you can tell, there's 260 slides in that keynote. We're trying to find another solution to play a lot of video. It's still a problem. But anyway, I don't want to digress. As you can tell, I answer questions long, so.
Thanks again, Mitch. That was mind-blowing. So another big round of applause for Mitch. Thank you. Also, thank you to Pentagram for hosting us tonight. Huge thanks. Myself, sorry. Matt on tech, Caroline, thank you so much for making this happen. The ISTD team, Claire Payne, ISTD chair, Eden, Alex, Sam, and Fred. And you're welcome to stick around for 5 minutes because we should leave in the next 10 minutes max. Okay, so run for the door. And last but not least, please enter our awards. There are a whole bunch more than branded schemes, and you're welcome to submit work even if it hasn't been out for 4 or 5 years. So anything done over the last 2 years, you can enter. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.